to another episode of the Being and Doing podcast, where I'm trying to bring to you humans from all over the world, which lead interesting and very fulfilled and content lives. And today, I'm very glad to have Shervin, which is a dear friend and a person that I know through his voice. So we met on one of his sound healing events in Bali. And when I was there for the first time, my impression was that with my eyes closed, that Shervin was really singing to the child inside me. And there was this lullaby almost effect of his voice. And it was beautiful to be held in such a way. And that was basically just what captivated me, not only to his voice, but to his personality, which really has to have something inside to express something so magical. And today I'm very curious to explore with Shervin even beyond that. Where does this voice come from? And how does he bring that to people, and how does he evoke feelings that I have been witnessing in that workshop? So we will start by introducing Shervin through his voice and through his songs, but then we will talk more into everything else around. Welcome, Shervin, and thank you. Wow. I will just let the silence sink in for just a second. Whoa. So, welcome, Shervin, and thank you so much for this. It just brings me to a completely different space. So maybe we can start by you telling us what was the song about.
This was a song, and thank you again for the invitation to share and be part of this whole experience with you. This was a song that I wrote for my father, who just passed away a few weeks ago, and it appears on my first album. It's the first song on that album, Spirit Night by Candlelight, and it's a poem that he wrote for me, and I just remember he said, I have this poem and I have these words, and you have to turn it into a song. And, my father is one of those people that had a hard time accepting that I transitioned from a career having a real job in Washington, D.C. to kind of being in this role of being a sound therapist full-time and a holistic practitioner. And for him to come to me at all with anything creative was just unexpected. And he came to me with this idea and said, look, I've got this thing in my head and it sounds like this. And he said, can you try and turn it into a song? Here are the words. And the words are so beautiful, and they have to do with just someone really having so much love for another, for their beloved one, and expressing to them that they are always with them and that they're always watching them, and always that they don't have to feel alone. So I
Wow.
took these words and I added a Sufi mantra to it and turned it into this song, and it has never felt more relevant now than after losing him. He was 93, he had lived a long life, but this song was dedicated to him, and it was one I wanted to share with all of you tonight.
Wow, thank you so much for that. And it's actually a very good entrance into trying to explore who is Shervin Boloorian. And basically, you mentioned very small details about having a normal, regular job and then going into sound healing. Can we start from what was your regular job? What happened there? And what are you doing now in more detail?
I was a policy advisor in Washington, D.C., and a peace coalition strategist, security strategist on issues of U.S.-Iran relations and various other security issues. But my specialty was U.S.-Iran relations, particularly trying to build bridges for diplomacy with Iran to prevent the possibility of another war. And I had that position for some time, and before that I was still involved in policy as an advisor for a think tank, and these were decisions that I made that were based on my career and my my interest in college and university, and it was only until I got to Washington and the severe amount of pressure that professionals feel from these jobs, where sometimes you feel that your true form of expression and your true inner, gifts in this world are just never see the light of day. So I think most people maybe can deal with that. Many people can just live their lives and receive their salaries and have put it towards their house and their home and their cars and so on. But for me, it was just unbearable. It was an unbearable illusion to see that even though my career was doing quite well, that I was very unwell, physically unwell, and just feeling a lot of that pressure can really bring a person down. And generally, the discourses in Washington, as many of us have seen, in a very kind of common way in the last 4 years, discourses are very entrenched and very combative. So if you can consider what would be civilian combat, it's these are sorts of things that some people get affected by, and I didn't realize that there was a world of energy back then, and that things you didn't just look at just purely strict anatomical medicine. That in the entire Eastern world, that there are new ways to look at how sickness works and how the roots of sickness can be coming from an entirely different picture than what you might see directly in front of you, and you have to use a lot of discernment and a lot of looking at that big picture holistically in a complete fashion to be able to determine what are the issues that might be at work here. So I took the time to, follow my dreams and follow my wishes, but it wasn't like I had a choice. I literally was in a very um, physically ill and unwell and desperate place. So I can tell you now that there are a lot more of us in this space than the world pays attention to. People are generally much more, their humanity is what makes them sensitive. And so for us to consider that we can be cogs in a machine is just, a fallacy. So some of us wake up to it at an earlier stage, and for me, it was at a time when I just couldn't deal with the physical pain of having to go to my meetings every day and put on a show.
And I'm curious, what was the point where you actually allowed yourself all those bottled up feelings or the missed expressions to come out? Because that's always a process, and it takes really courage to say, I will feel all of this, because that means I need to change something, actually.
You really hit the nail on the head. I will feel all of this. We spend so much of our lives numbing what we feel, ignoring, bypassing, paying very little attention to what really is happening. And, the great thing about learning about energy and the Eastern perception of health is that you start to learn about, you know, taking responsibility for some of the choices that you make. And you start to learn that when you do that, you start to regain, you create these connections and bridges to the world of your senses. And for many of us at a very young age, we have cut off our world of our senses because it was just too overwhelming to deal with emotions, to deal with, very sensitive palates to deal with sensitive, skin, you name it, sensitive smell, hearing. And so you get to a point where you get to a regime where you fill yourself with the types of foods and experiences and people and situations and types of work that numb you, or they have an effect of bringing your awareness to the number one sense that is valuable in this world, that has financial value, is how brainy you are, how you can be the smartest person in the room. So I played that game for an awful lot of time, and there is no winner. There's
Yeah.
just never a winner. And there are a lot of losers. There's a lot of, insecurities and doubts and fears that play out in that scenarios. So all of this is to say that, when you start to get more of a connection with your senses and start to feel more, your level of, being able to discern and be able to say, no, this is not for me. Yes, this is for me. The choices that you make come from a much clearer place, in my opinion. And you can start to be more attuned to what, some people would call your soul vibration. And you can put it another way, and you can just say the core you, the pure you, a part of you that is not overlaid by other people's demands, by expectations that are unrealistic, that may have been there, that have been passed down from parents or other loved ones. We are told that our level of success has to do with our status and our salary, and maybe that's not. Maybe there are other ways to measure these things. What about
And
happiness?
and that's also there's one funny thing is when we say someone is sensitive, it almost has a negative bearing to it, as if sensitivity is not a gift, because in general, the higher level of being able to detect something, the more alerted and able you are to deal with life, no? And suddenly we have used that word and pushed it back on sensitive people as if something is wrong with them. And it takes courage and years and time to get back to that place. And I'm just wondering, uh, do you remember yourself as a child? And do you remember that sensitivity? And also, when was the first connection for you with that part of yourself? And how do you think has that really helped you to then break apart from everything that you have just described?
Well, as a child, I do remember being very sensitive and picking up a lot, and also I remember being a teenager and thinking, "Wow, this is a curse." There's what am I can't even block out, the energy of knives and spears when I'm walking on my way to work from people who have these angry looks on their faces, and they shoot me a look, and it, just I turn into a puddle of water. And of course there's no explanation for this in a rational kind of um, you know typical way of looking at things, Cartesian way of looking at life. But from an energy standpoint, it was just one of those examples that, yes, you're a sensitive being. And I think one of the times that I realized it was that I reconnected with that sensitivity. I remember very distinctly. I was working in Washington, D.C. I was on the verge of going into a breakdown. And my relationship had tanked, and I had a very difficult boss and difficult situations that I was dealing with. There was a high pressure kind of the responsibilities on my shoulders. And I remember I was just like, I'm going to take a week off and I'm going to go. And I discovered that there was this thing where you could go and swim with wild dolphins.
Wow.
And, some people called swimming with dolphins a bucket list thing, like something you all want to do in your life at least once. And I know exactly why. Because when you're in that environment where it's cold and dark and you're under the water and you're snorkeling and you're seeing these very magnificent, gracious, vastly intelligent beings, playful beings, swimming around you, and you look at how they interact with each other, how they turn their fins to hold hands. Like it's almost as if when they swim together, they hold hands. And you're like, wait a minute, this is odd. And you cannot help, Alexander, you cannot help coming back into your innocence. And that's what I had forgotten. That moment of connecting with my innocence, and incidentally, these are animals that work with sound and vibration too, the dolphins. It really kind of brought me into a new perspective. And I went back to Washington. I was in bliss. Nobody recognized me when I got back. Everybody thought that I had kidnapped the old me. And, it took me about a week before somebody came and like stole my BlackBerry or something from a bar, and then I got yanked back down into the heavy density of the city. But in that one week, I was like, wow, life can be different. And just because I was told that life has to be hard and that I had to make all kinds of sacrifices that had to do with my time and the quality of time that I have. That a lot of that is really part of a narrative that ignores the individual spirit. So that's how I found my reconnection to the world of sensitivity, and from there I got into the world of energy and took a year-long apprenticeship as shamanic studies. And from there, I went into sound therapy, and I discovered my passion, which I'm still pursuing today.
And I actually have there two follow-up questions. One is related to your Iranian roots and to your connection to music. I actually don't know your story, and it would be nice if we could hear it now. And the second question is basically that innocence that you convey uh, really comes through in your music. And I'm just curious, how do you keep reminding yourself of that innocence now through time? Because a lot of years have passed and you're still somewhat connected. And I hear it every time you start singing. So yeah, we can start first with Iran and then go to the second part.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a big subject there about my Iranian heritage. I was born in Iran. My mother is ethnically Kurdish. I was raised in the UK, where you are now.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, from 3 to 16, I was in the UK. I became a British citizen, and then I left home and went to the university in the US. But I had always, I had kind of been a little bit like very neglecting and very distant from my heritage. I did not accept it. I did not embrace it. I went through a phase of kind of self-loathing because I was different and I was foreign, and I did
And just
not.
to interrupt you quickly, what did your parents do? Like, were they also bringing the roots with themselves, or they themselves also have not really been connected to the culture as much?
They were very connected to the culture, but they were retirees. My mother was a principal in a middle school. My dad worked for the Shah's oil refinery,
Mm-hmm.
and was in charge of a division in the office. And so, they were both very much into the Iranian culture. I think they believed that things would change and that we would be able to go back to Iran at a much earlier date, uh, almost instantaneously. We're talking right after the revolution in Iran, and people did not know what was going to happen, and some people genuinely thought that things would ease up and that all of the people who were no longer able to be in the country or had left the country would be able to return. And that has not happened 43 years later. And all I can say is that they were not in a really good position themselves to really make it through on their own.
And
So
I'm actually curious there because I don't know much about the revolution, but I also know about leaving home due to wars and actually not being able to come back. And even for me now, um, I have left Serbia and I would love to come back, but it just always feel like the values are still not where you want them to be. Um, and so I'm just curious how much of that kind of unconscious feelings you have been immersed in while you were a child, and actually what do you know about that, and how did that affect your upbringing and your childhood in a way?
yeah, it really affected. I'm sure you can relate to this. And when you start seeing images in the news and you start to see how people vilify an entire culture or an entire race of people
Yes.
simply because of their name, simply because of their faiths, then as a kid, it's very confusing. And you start to wonder, well, why, what is this about? How is it that, these people who are the same ethnicity or similar ethnicity and they're all buddies and they're all fine, but all of a sudden there's this particular group and they have to be vilified. But all of this really led me to ask some serious questions about power and politics. It was the motivation behind me, abandoning my passions and wanting to learn about how decisions are made in Washington and what the policy is. It had governed my destiny and the destiny of my family and countless other families, even today still. And this is not just in the Middle East. This is also in Eastern Europe, and it's in Africa and various other parts of the world. So, I felt like I had no choice but to really ask these very fundamental questions. And and the more I started to go into that world, the more confusing it got.
Yeah.
And being in Washington, I felt like I'm gonna I'm gonna be part of this movement, and I'm gonna change people's attitudes, and I'm gonna, help bring about peace and understanding. And I don't at all object to the good work that a lot of people are doing in favor of peace. And I do believe that there is some value in working through the system. But I also realize, coming back to our last discussion, if you are a sensitive being and you're surrounded by a discourse that rejects sensitivity, then you will be spinning your wheels ad infinitum. That was the case with me. So I switched, and I, you know, I found a way to use music and to use my culture and reconnect with my culture and to celebrate that culture, because I started to realize that there was more than just what CNN and Fox News want to project about this culture, and that this was the way that the world could listen more deeply and intently on what these cultures have to offer. There is, so much richness in any culture in the world, and that does not exclude Iran. And so I found this figure called Rumi, who everybody adores. And first of all, everybody thinks Rumi's from Turkey. He's not. He, he moved to Turkey. He moved to Anatolia, but he was kind of like a lot of us refugees. He was from Persia, and he spoke in Persian, and he wrote his poems in Persian. And so all of a sudden, to learn about the Sufis and to learn about Rumi and these wonderful, you know, um, wise expressions about love and life and friendship and reaching across cultures and across religions and building a bridge to those different ways that people worship and the ways that people love. It brought me to an entirely new understanding about my own background, my own culture, and then even later in life, I learned about my indigenous heritage and exploring that. And there's still so much more to explore. But as you can see, I've kind of answered your question in a very long way. But just to say that this is how I found a real positivity and a re-embracing of something that had been twisted by people and organizations with an agenda that does not involve looking at looking at folks who disagree with you as humans. You look at them as the enemy, and as we saw in Iraq, human beings can be degraded to a statistic the same way insects can if you don't add that human face. So that's kind of a lot of the reason why I bring in the world music that I do. It's not just straight sound healing and sound therapy. There's also an element of cross-cultural recognition and understanding. And I love to work with other musicians that do the same thing, including yourself and other wonderful musicians who we both know, to because we just don't know. We don't get to see what the reality is. Back then it was the Soviets, now it's the Muslims, tomorrow
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah, I mean, this is beautiful, and also always feel free to have your answers as long-winded as needed, because that's the whole point of this. Um, because I think we really need this kind of voices actually, and we need this kind of discourse, because I feel when there is no space for an expression of all the feelings that these cultures have, there is a deep sense, at least there was for me, of unfairness. They are there and they are able to portray an image of your country that they have never lived in, they have never experienced, they have never seen a person who has been part of that culture, yet they portray you as if they absolutely know you. And for me, that really left a deep, deep sense of real unfairness. Yeah, it was almost like I really want to have a voice and I really want to say how rich my culture is, how much is there to see and how much is there to explore. So I'm very happy that to see that even coming from a completely different background, there are these points of humanity that kind of tie us all together. And I really want to explore more about uh, you reconnecting with the music and actually, where was the point where you were connected with the music for the first time? Um, and then how did it look to reconnect back to it?
I've always loved music. I mean, you're also in the same vein. I feel you really have a deep appreciation for music, but for some reason, maybe because we want to show that we can be successful, that we can be intelligent, that we can, try to do what everybody else does, as well as anybody else can, that I had to go and get myself a proper career. But my passion has always been music. So I even think back to, radio stuff going on in the background, my parents' home, listening to these things, and at the first not really understanding it, but it seeps into the consciousness. This stuff really, it affects you in a way that you don't even understand. And there are some people even now, if I were to play some kind of lullaby from a certain culture, people will immediately, they don't even need to know the words, but it will immediately bring up a sense of emotion, a sense of connection. And I feel that this sort of thing is what really speaks to me. This is what really I would advocate for. I want to champion music that gets beyond the surface level, top 40 entertainment experience, because it has so much more potential. And if you don't have to take my word for it, just ask any neurologist about what music does to the brain and
Yes.
how it activates so many parts of the brain. And we still can't explain all of these things. So much about music is still such a mystery. And it's that mystical quality of these songs, these healing songs, these songs from different cultures. And to me, everybody thinks of the world music of this type as one thing is from here, and one thing is from here, and one thing is from there. But they are all threaded together. You hear a Gregorian chant, and then you hear a Native American song, and then you hear a song, from Bulgaria, a folk song, and you can make these threads, you can find these commonalities, and you can see that this is where the fundamental, pure, you know, profound vibration, the essence of music, can really come back and, give us the medicine that we need today. We did it in our tribes, we did it in our communities, and as we have moved further and further into a world where we are kind of fragmented, and we, rather than dealing with our problems and facing them, we kind of unfriend our friends on Facebook and disagree with them and push them away into the periphery and just kind of call them crazy. But there are some cultures where you can't do that, including the Balinese culture. Out of necessity, we are in this together and we have to work together. And sometimes that means getting to the grief beyond the anger.
Yes.
And what better way to do that than music that can really help remind you of those fundamental emotions like joy, like grief. These things span across cultures, they span across, ethnicities. They are universal. They are truly a universal language. And yeah, that's I can't put it in any other way except that once you start to feel these things yourself, it starts to spread. And to answer your question very quickly,
Yeah.
for me, I really felt that I started to get more into songs and melodies that would come to me when I have twin boys, they're 12 years old now. But when they were young and babies, they were very boisterous, they were very naughty. It was hard to get them to bed. And so I would sing to them, and these melodies would come to me, and of course these melodies were rooted in the subconscious that I didn't realize, and then from there I would turn them into songs. And then I started to realize, wow, these things have power, because if they can put these two screaming children into a state of equilibrium and peace, then surely that can work for other human beings as well.
And there's a really funny thing. This just this morning, I was listening about attachment and the psychology of attachment. And basically, one of the ways for a mother or any carer to show to the child that it is present, it is there, is through singing. Is through basically kind of wrapping them in their own presence through the voice. So actually, it's really funny that you discovered that very spontaneously, but we have now studied it and then we understand it, even on a level of psychology. And I'm actually also curious about. I want to really go back to that innocence because I feel in order to express that innocence, you really need to accept, cherish, and nourish your inner child. And it's very difficult for a lot of us to connect to that child because sometimes that child is very scared, sometimes it's very angry, sometimes very defensive. And I'm wondering, was there a time where that was a difficulty for you? And if yes, how did you get back to that connection?
With the inner child, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for most of my life, I was feeling very disconnected to this part of me. Um, I felt at a very young age, I think a lot of people feel like they grow up fast because they have to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you are in a situation where you're in a strange land, you don't speak the language, your parents don't speak the language, um, you just are kind of seen and experienced in a different way, and sometimes in not such a friendly way. Then you have to toughen up, and toughening up for some of us is heartbreaking because it means we have to shield something that is a natural inclination, perhaps to be warm and receptive and to be caring and just kind, courteous, and for you to have to shut down, build a wall, put on this look on your face, and stride out into the world and tell everybody how tough you are, and to make that something that even you consider as a role or something attractive, or something that you want to emulate, seems quite backwards on a fundamental level, for a lot of us. So I did that, and I became someone who was an atheist. I became um, very conservative in my viewpoints, and very just intolerant, and generally very angry. I was loud. I was obnoxious, and difficult to get along with.
I'm sorry to the funny thing is I cannot even imagine a Shervin persona like this. Knowing you the way I know you are, and like, and yeah, it is really difficult to imagine that there has ever been a different Shervin.
Well, thank you, because I think that's a nice compliment for me. But I have to say that some of us have to learn to come back into alignment with who we really are. And I had forgotten. I think a lot of us forget because it's just hard, and you're expected to be a certain way. And I don't think this is just men. I think it's a lot of women too. And I think a lot of women, it's harder because you are kind of dictated to be a certain something in a man's world, but at the same time you also have to be feminine, and you have to
Yeah.
have all these other qualities that make you connected to that femininity. So I think a lot of it has to do with coming to terms with your own, vulnerabilities. And if you can really embrace and, connect to your vulnerabilities, then it can really shift things. And I have to say that, as someone um, who is a singer, there's nothing more vulnerable than when you have to share your voice with the world. So you have to get into a place of radical acceptance with even your own voice. Some people can't even stand their own voice on an answering, message.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. And to think that you are given a unique voice that is nobody else can ever replicate that unique voice. And it's something to celebrate, but yet we can't even come to terms with our own voices. So I think singing and coming back into connection with singing, falling back in love with music was my way of getting back into a place where the innocence and the softness and the vulnerability could come forward. And even now, it's still very hard for me. I have the advantage of being able to play music while people are lying down on the floor with their eyes closed, you know, for the most part. But even at the beginning, I would hardly use my voice. I remember that. Even when I was
Wow.
doing, I hardly ever used my voice. It was used maybe 2 or 3 minutes throughout an entire session. And now it's become, it is my primary instrument.
Wow.
And when I say,
This is sorry.
go
This
ahead.
is again also very unbelievable because I just remember your session and I almost when I close my eyes and I just like transport back to that place, I only hear your voice. I don't
Oh,
remember that there was any other instrument present in that room and at any time. And that's a really funny thing, and I think that's also something I really like for people who might be listening is and maybe having all these insecurities to say we are really always the only ones who are stopping ourselves in a way, no? And it is quite sad because imagine that you have stopped yourself and that beauty just does not come out. It's almost like a loss for humanity. So I'm very grateful you found your way. And if there is anything in particular that helped you to do that and that can maybe help anyone in the audience, I would be very curious to hear about that as well.
about finding my way and becoming more connected to my voice and to
Yes.
my.
It's a very psychological thing. I will just say one more thing there. I'm sorry, I know it's an interview, but there are so many thoughts.
No, I
Um,
love it.
I had actually a session with my psychologist where we were also trying to liberate my voice because was a very connected thing with me not being able to express my anger. And it was everything was almost just kind of coming back, like I could not like make it just go over my lips. And so there's so much psychology behind why we are not ready to use our voices. So I'm just curious how many things in your liberation of your voice was really understanding your own psychology, and how much was it just intuitive and a process that you have built up over time?
I think you're so right about the psychology because it really is so much about what stayed with me when you phrased the question was um, that we get into in our own ways. And uh, that's something that probably applies on a much wider level. With the voice, it's just much more noticeable, you know, because how many of us have had to swallow our true feelings about something or are hurt, or just not be able to share something because another person couldn't handle us. We're too much for this parent or this sibling or this partner or this lover, and it became more convenient to shrink. And I think it's a very important thing to go into the voice as part of your inner child, as one of the components of your inner child, as one of the representations of your inner child. Consider your inner child ranging from 0 years all the way to whenever you're 13 or 14 or even beyond that. At some point we had a really great relationship with pure expression. We would sing and dance and we didn't have any judgment about it. And something then would shift. And for many of us, people are just cruel. People are critical, overly critical. And I don't think people are mean to be that way. Honestly, I feel like it's just what was shown to them, and they feel like that this is the normal way to be. But to answer your question, what are some of the techniques for me to get back into a deeper connection with my voice and to be able to really, I would say even any gift at all, is to completely change your relationship with that gift and to get out of the mindset that it was meant to be there to thrill somebody and to just make somebody else feel good or to give them, high entertainment value. Because that you're going to trip yourself up. You're going to always feel like you're not enough. It's not enough. It's not good enough. The world creates that hierarchy for us all the time, mentally and otherwise. So, if you can connect with your voice like I did as a tool for therapy, as a tool for self-care, as a tool for, releasing stuck emotions, as a tool for accessing a place where you can create safety for yourself. And in so doing that, these qualities can then be transferred to others in the work that you do. But your attitude is different. You see, it's not like you're standing up on a stage and belting it out because you want to show how good you are. That's a different relationship with the voice than what we're talking about. When you come into that place where you reconnect, you can build a relationship. Like any relationship, you got to pick up the phone and you got to spend time cultivating it and, show up to it every day. Give it your love and your care. Listen to what the voice is actually wanting from you rather than you just, no, you got to perform for me now. Come on, squeeze it out of the throat. And all you're going to do is tighten up and get yourself out of your comfort zone. So change your relationship. Build a friendship with your voice. It's a pure part of you, perhaps the purest.
Wow. This, I feel, only this is almost a gift for anyone who is listening, but it certainly is a gift for me, especially since I'm almost on this journey of trying to cultivate that relationship. So it is really, really, really beautiful what you have just said. So thank you very much. You can see it by my smile as well.
You have such a pretty voice. I've heard you sing, and it's really exceptional. And I just hope you keep going with it and
Oh,
share more. I'm so delighted to know that you're working on your voice and singing as well with other professionals. And
thank
yeah,
you.
you go.
Thank you. And I would just want to go back to success. So we touched upon it a little bit in the beginning. And I was just wondering, when was it the first time that you were aware of the concept of success? So, what was the first representation of success that you have a remembrance of?
Hmm. I think you would have to go back to when I was about to choose a major in college. You know how you have to choose a specialty, and it was just before I was starting college. I just moved to the States to go to college there. And I remember my sister. I adore my sister, but I just remember her saying, uh, I know that you can't be a doctor because you react to blood in a way that it kind of grossed me out. I passed out when I had to like take parts of animals and try to dissect them in school. I would start seeing stars and fall over. And she said, "Well, you can't do that. So you'll just have to be a lawyer. How about being a lawyer?" And and I thought to myself, "Well, why is this is a bit early. I haven't even started college yet." And and it was just the sort of thing where I was kind of on notice that this was the mentality of what you had to do in order to be successful, and we could use a lawyer in the family, um, and you know, I I didn't really get it. I didn't really get. I just went along with it until I realized that I liked when you get into law. Pre-law is political science, and as I was doing political science classes, I got inspired by the whole entirely different aspect of it, which had to do with social justice and globalization and preventing climate change and these sorts of things. And I don't think my family was really expecting that.
And we can actually leech onto that. So, that's an interesting thing. In a way, you were different from your family. And that's always a difficult position to be in for a lot of us, because we don't really have a choice there. Um, we we have to accept them, but at the same time, we have to accept us. And it's almost as an additional burden, uh, because we are rarely accepted as well. So I'm curious, how did your journey look there? Because a lot of the struggles really come from that constant chase for the acceptance, that constant chase for, I really need a place where someone sees me without me restraining my expression. So I'm very glad to hear that you had that moment with your dad, but I'm sure it came after a lot of struggles. So I'm curious, uh, yeah, how did you manage to balance that self-expression, that purest expression of you, with those expectations that were obviously quite high?
Uh, I feel like so many of us, and me included, kind of completely sideline our passions because we want to please our parents, we want to please our loved ones, and education isn't a cheap thing. It was an investment on their part, and a lot of it was an investment on their part into my development. And so I felt an awful lot of obligation to do something for my parents, and that's why I completely neglected music. Music is not a genuine art and a genuine career in their minds. And when I did try to do music, it was just like, oh, I don't want to do rock and roll. No, I don't want to, be this kind of showman in front of people. Um, no, that wasn't me at all. You can see the way that I play and I sing.
Yes.
It's not really my main thing. So I think what happened for me, even though I didn't become a lawyer, I did get a master's degree. I did, end up with the status of working in the California State Senate and then working in Washington, D.C. And, you know, the kinds of jobs that I was doing and staying in that career had so much to do with first launching because that's what was expected of me. And then it becomes like, well, I can see that this isn't really what I love, but I'm so in it head first that I can't pull myself out of this situation. What the hell do I do? I just got to keep going like a freight train that's kind of loose and get, there's no control over the brakes. The one thing that made me change my mind was because I got sick. I was in emergency room. I was so sick. I had surgery after surgery on my knee. I had digestion issues. I had sinus issues. I had, issues to do with pain and pain medication. And it was not stopping, no matter what. No matter what I was doing, who I was seeing, what specialist I would go to. I'm not opposed to Western medicine. I'm not saying that Western medicine is bad, but I do believe that Western medicine can learn a lot from Eastern medicine, and the two can complement each other, and that holistic, integrative medicine can work wonders because of these types of cases where you just don't know what it is that is making you sick over and over again. I'm not the only one. I know that there's, more than you can count, probably,
Yeah.
in the same boat, but we just are ignored. So in that scenario, what am I going to do, Alexandra? I can't allow myself to sink further into this swamp of sickness, and out of the decision to say, look, I tried it your way. I tried it, it got to the point where even my parents could see what I was dealing with. And they were, they thought it would be a temporary thing, but they were initially like, we can see you're in pain, take a break from it.
Yeah.
And that's how I started to, even personally justify it. It's hard for even a person to say to themselves, I am going to choose a different way of life. Nobody's going to instruct you as to how you're going to make a living as a sound therapist. You know, you just have to take the plunge, and the universe shows up for you. I can only give you that advice.
Wow, it's a very encouraging story, actually, to hear, because I feel there are, for sure, as you said, many people that have the same struggles, and there's this, what you described, which is called the sinking fallacy, the sinking cost fallacy, or something like this. But basically, when you invest so much, and now you are like, but I invested so much, this doesn't work, but I have already invested so much, and I really need to keep going. But actually, sometimes, even for something you like, you only need to invest 6 months to a year, and you might have a higher success that you ever imagined, but you just don't want to try. So yeah, I fully understand what you mean. And also, just comment on the fact that I feel in Western medicine often we treat the symptom.
Yes.
And and there are many cases, which I fully agree, where the symptom is purely anatomical and purely coming from a space of something doesn't really clearly work in the physiology. But there are a lot of psychosomatic problems which you have experienced even on your own skin, which can be treated just by addressing our personalities, our psychology, our needs, our wants, our feelings. And I'm actually very grateful that you're sharing this story, because I feel that many people hearing it will maybe have a moment to allow themselves to actually come back to that space. So, really, thank you. Thank you very much for this. And in alignment with that, we were talking about the success that has been given to you as a concept. But what was the first time that you had an internal feeling of success, where you felt like,
Ah,
now I feel it inside
yeah.
deeply?
Okay, so let me get back to okay, a moment of intrinsic reward from my music, from my decision to follow sound therapy. I think there were two moments. The first had to do with um, my mother experiencing the work that I do and having a just a response that was so positive and so supportive and so unexpected. I think she got to witness just how many people in the room that were with us who had come out of the space in an entirely different attitude than when they first went in. And I think she began to realize what this world of sound therapy was about, and that it was an actually a valuable service, or a service that had that she could give credit to. So that was one of the moments, and the other one had to do with I started a group of sound healers in Bali called the Bali Sound Healer Collective. And these were musicians that didn't want to do entertainment, and they wanted to share music in the sacred way, in a way that I discussed earlier in this interview. And I just remember there were moments where I would be the host. I would introduce all these various different sessions, and at the beginning I wasn't even getting paid. I was just kind of wanting to do this out of a service to get momentum going and to build interest. Nobody knew what sound healing was back then. Nobody had an idea of what this thing is about. The only people that would come to our sessions were, yogis who had twisted their ankles or had some kind of injury, or it was, we had the lunchtime slot, which was not probably the least attractive slot of the day, because all the yogis, it was too hot and they were all, having lunch. But something, I remember it very distinctly, that there was this one time, and I could really get the impression, even though we were just starting out, I got the impression that after the session was done, it was some guest musician who was there, a guest presenter, and there were just so many tears. This person and I, we did a collaboration, and there was so many tears. There was so much appreciation, and nobody left the room. The session was done. Nobody left the room. And at the very end, I had these Balinese. I don't know if you were ever there when the Balinese kind of priest would come and go around and give everybody a blessing at the end while he was chanting.
Yeah.
And I just remember in that moment of reverence, you know, nobody wanted to leave, and people were getting these blessings. And I just looked around, and all I could smell was incense, and there were holy water on people and flowers in their hair, and this feeling that, everybody in that room looked and felt beautiful. and like they had been touched by beauty and that they were experiencing beauty and that this was a memory that they would never forget, least of all me. So in that moment, the grace of Bali and the grace of having this musician be in such a place of joy for not being an entertainer, actually choosing a different path, and myself being witnessing all of this and being part of it, and just seeing how the entire room had been transformed. It was this validating moment. I knew that this was the right place for me to be in, and that's never changed.
Wow, it is exactly what you're describing, and I have felt it myself. So, wow, yes, I understand why that feels like success internally. Yeah, even when I teach yoga and someone tells me, I cried, but I
Mm.
turned off my video for no one to see me, I know
Ah,
that my work is done, that my work
mm,
actually has value. Because sometimes, and I even listened to a lecture today where basically crying is the ultimate resolution of any feeling we have. So he was saying even a child, if it has a temper tantrum, try to get him to cry,
yeah,
because then everything is resolved. So
agreed.
yeah, thank you really for doing that work. And I am curious, what do you think was for you the most difficult kind of obstacle between you and the success you have now, or that fulfillment that you have felt? Was it what was instilled in you by society? Was it a combination with what you had inside and that resistance? Um, so there's one more thing. I will be a little bit digressing here, but there was a video on self-love I was listening to, and the interesting part of that video was saying that we always have self-love. What we always need to get uh, to kind of go through is all the obstacles that are kind of impeding that expression. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering, where do you feel were your biggest obstacles for that?
Well, it sounds like a paraphrasing of a very famous Rumi quote,
Maybe?
Jalaluddin Rumi, where he says, you are something about you are not here to learn about love, but to learn about all of the barriers that get in the way of you being able to love. And he's super right about that. It's like if you consider that love is your natural way, that being loving is a natural way to be, and that there are these forces before you were even born that can affect you, limiting those pure and natural ways of loving. It just makes you become much more aware of of the programming that we get at such an early age. And I would say, to answer your question, it does apply to me. Like you said, your question had to do with what is it that gets in the way of you feeling that intrinsic reward. And I think it's just a lot of doubt, a lot of fear, that I'm scared that people don't really appreciate what it is that I want to offer the world. Why would anybody drive on a motorbike or in a car all the way to come and experience my work? Don't they have anything better to do with their time? It doesn't seem, you know, it doesn't seem plausible. I had to really work a lot with art and fear, and the courage to be able to create and to be true to your art and your personal expression of art. And that's all this is. It's just another form of art. I think some people like to complain about holistic therapy as some kind of science. Well, it's a holistic science, and that means that it's an art. It's an art form, and it's meant to be. It's meant to be, a way of practicing creativity with a human being as a canvas, if you like. And you're bringing back the vitality and the vibrance of a beautiful canvas that's already there. So yeah, I would say that those things that have to do with just what holds you back, what makes you feel that you're worthy, a lifelong struggle for so many of us.
Yeah.
It would not have been the same for me. I mean this very sincerely, Alex. If I didn't have people who believed in me and who reminded me of what my gifts are, and that I actually believed them when they would believe in me.
Yeah. And maybe talking about that, who are those people who recognized your gifts? So who are those people who actually were part of your pure expression?
I mean, there are different mentors and different people. I wish I could say that it was my family, but I feel like they kind of jumped on board later and
Yes.
gave me support later. Um, I had a mentor in Washington, D.C. Her name was Lyndon Klein. She's a sculptor. And she, on a weekly basis, she made me hire her.
Oh wow, that's an interesting story. Let's go into that.
Because she said, you're not really meant for being around here. Like you need to stay connected to your creativity. I can see that your passion is music and poetry. And so she would give me assignments every week, and she made me pay her. And
Oh
she
wow.
said, "Okay, it will be the minimum wage, but I want you to pay me because then you're going to actually value what it is that I'm doing here." It's genius. So she got me into a place where even in the belly of the beast, as some people say in DC, working in that environment, she helped me stay very true to my gifts and made me even acknowledge them as gifts. I didn't even realize they were gifts. I didn't even dare to believe that I had these talents. And then, I had people here in Bali, um, like a couple called Dave and Felicity, who just showed up to my events. And, I had no idea that they were in a position where they ended up supporting me and sponsoring me. And at a time when I was going to fall through the cracks financially, they lifted me out of a very, big hole. I, I don't know that if they realize how valuable their belief and their faith and their desire to help me was at that time. So you don't actually escape struggle by following your true calling. I think it would be a fallacy if I were to say that you escape struggle. Sometimes you bring in more of it into your life. But when you follow your passion, you inspire others who are inspired by your passion. And they will show up for you if you show up for yourself.
Wow. That inspires me already, actually, because that was one of my questions to you, and you really answered it already here. Exactly that life does not become easier when you start following what you love. It just becomes enjoyable even when it's hard. But yeah. And
Yes,
the
it's
funny thing
a very
is,
good way to put it. That's exactly right. It becomes, you can always fall back on your joy, right?
Yeah.
You can't do that if you're doing a job that you hate or that you're not aligned with.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
what gets you through the darkest times. You can still show
Exactly.
up and do what you love.
Wow. The funny thing is, I have a lot of questions about success, but I have no need to ask any of those because it just feels that all of the things that we are talking about are just so much more juicy. Yeah. So, my question is, um, when we start following what our passion is and what we feel that our calling is, we are most of the time not sure. But almost there is this, again, kind of a delusion that as soon as we start following it, we will know that this is exactly what we are meant to do. So I'm curious to go deeper into this part of your story. In when was it that you actually had the firm belief, um, ah, yes, now I feel it? Because I'm sure that there were many
Mm.
doubts in the process, and you mentioned some of them actually previously. But yeah, I'm curious to to know more about the path itself.
I felt like when I started to to do my training in the energy world, I immediately felt an impact. And the things that were, year-long dedications or years-long dedications to physical therapy and various other, you know, um, ways of dealing with some of my ailments, like these all just kind of like seem to pale in comparison to this understanding of energy and understanding of my own responsibility for the energy that I put out in the world, and that mirrors back to me, and that if you kind of can pay attention to these kinds of things, it will change your life, and it did for me. Within just a few months, um, I like my relationship with my dad that had been estranged all my life transformed, and we fell in love. The fact that I became a father myself in that time period, and having to deal with all of the uncertainties and the questions, and because these were not planned, twins that I had. And that's just the scratching the surface, understanding what it is that motivates me in work, realizing that my whole life is a reaction when it comes to certain choices that I've made. That there's no, very little of an understanding of what is Shervin really about and what is he really pursuing in his life. What does he want to do? That's really coming from him. That's genuinely coming from him. All of these questions I could not answer. These when you have a good teacher, as I did with people like Fabienne Maman, who was my teacher with sound therapy, one of the pioneers of sound therapy, and Robin Rice, and Marie Bergman and others who I had spent some time with. And they have a tendency to be able to see within you the gifts that you can't see yourself and be able to cultivate those gifts.
Wow, that is kind of a beautiful thing. It's sometimes it feels that there's this sentence, I don't know who has said it, but when you finally feel seen, a part of you can heal. And it's really beautiful to have these people along the way. And this is the funny thing is, and I wanted to ask this as well, we always feel we have to find out ourselves without other people. And I feel that is kind of a sad thing that we are trying to perpetuate as a truth. But at the end of the day, it feels that people and interactions are what really reveals ourselves to ourselves in a way. So I'm curious, what did these three basic teachers and people reveal to you in that process?
Well, the first thing is, like I mentioned, when I was doing the shamanic studies, I learned about energy, the world of self-responsibility. It's huge. That was the lesson that I got from Robin Rice. And then I got the lesson I got from Fabienne Maman, which was my sound healing teacher, was that, hey, you can create music and sound in a way that is so beyond what you could possibly have fathomed. Because as we all know, as musicians, you got three jobs. You either join an orchestra and be the best of the best, or you can become a music teacher, or you kind of choose to, try to make it as a rock and roller, or someone who's doing, music for the entertainment world. And none of these really appeal to me. You get to a point where you fall out of love with your bliss. What is that all about? Some of us are just not meant for that, trinity. And that is how I felt when I discovered sound therapy. I was like, this is it. I didn't even realize this world existed. And, my other mentors, they all gave me similar types of lessons, all about, that things can be possible when you didn't think that they could be possible. You reframe the way that life is presented to you. You don't have to spend your life in an office rotting away if that's not really what you're about. If it is, then great. Please, you do a great service to the world by doing that. But if you're just in it for the salary, maybe you need to think about whether that's really going to feed you. Not just feed in terms of putting bread on your table, but there's something about a different kind of nourishment that involves you actually being able to show up to your life, to your loved ones, to the ones who, to your mission. To your mission. Each of us has a mission.
And the beauty of what I also perceive from you is, and you touched upon this briefly, is that you don't come up as a showman. And actually, I'm very sensitive when I go to concerts or where I go somewhere, when someone is really trying to take their own energy and kind of put it on me. I feel like the beauty of being in your sound healing is basically I'm showered in your energy in order for my to come out.
Wow.
And this has been an incredible experience in Bali, and I myself felt liberated, because I always felt that I also want self-expression. And this is something that I feel somehow it's really sad when art is the numbing resource, basically.
Wow. Yeah, that's it. Yes. And it really has gotten to that point, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. In some instances, of course, there are some places. I also don't want to generalize and to have this fatalistic view of the world.
Right.
But yeah, Yeah, thank you really for that. And I actually wanted to ask you out of curiosity, so how did you get to Bali and how did you get to like root yourself in Bali?
I had just become a dad, and I had been laid off from my job because of the financial downturn in 2008, 2009. And I was actually laid off on my birthday.
Oh, wow.
And I decided that I was offered a job from another organization, actually with Greenpeace at the time, and I chose to turn it down. I said, I'm going to go to Bali. I had heard that Bali was one of those rare places in the world where you could go and enjoy lovely weather and beautiful nature and beautiful culture, beautiful musical culture. The people are incredibly kind and um, generous and genuine people. And I just thought, wow, this sounds great. It sounds like the kind of place that isn't dominated by shopping malls and cookie cutter hotels. Um, and that really inspired me to be able to go and, you know, detox from Washington while I was raising my kids. And my ex-partner and I came there when my kids were about 9, 10 months old. And we were only supposed to stay for 6 months, but we ended up staying for now 11 years.
Wow. Wow. And Bali has very special thing. I feel I felt it as well. This feeling of on one side community, but also on the other side of um, uh, also of pure expression as well. And I'm curious now, going along the paths of you being a sound healer and an artist and a creative, and actually having to live off it. So, what was the journey like there for you? How did you find a way to support yourself through your work? And what were there the obstacles? Because sometimes it's difficult to put our value if we don't think what we do actually has value.
Mm, yeah. I had fortunately, things in life happen for reasons. And I had learned these amazing skills when I was in Washington, D.C. And these skills had to do with technical writing and being able to write press releases and condense things in ways and express things in ways that you wouldn't be able to find from the artistic community. And as I was in Bali and I was looking for work and trying to get by, I had the good fortune of being able to be brought on board by a group called Bali Spirit Group. And they were not interested in anything to do with my gifts as a sound therapist or a vocalist or a recording artist. They were interested in my writing skills. And so that aspect of my old life really helped me to hold things over while I was completing my training, getting my sessions in, gaining my credentials. And then, because of the contacts that I had made through Bali Spirit Group, which was also an umbrella organization for the Yoga Barn and for the Bali Spirit Festival, I was fortunate enough to be able to have an audience with the people in charge. And I told them, look, that's not what I really do. That's not really my passion, the writing. My passion is this. And could you give me a shot? Could I get a slot to do this? And they did that. And it turned out to be a success. And in terms of even the first event, there was like 18 people that showed up. And then they invited me to do a weekly event. And then they invited me to start a program. And each and every step, I wanted to expand things and take things even further. And the beauty of this kind of approach is that you really build community, you can really build networks, you build trust, and you also can use your old career as a springboard into your new one, which is what I
And that's another interesting thing there is I also read it somewhere that uh, basically the successful artists are also the ones that have structure around their art, that there is no real art without having a certain level of structure. So I'm curious, how was that happening for you? So did you have some level of planning? And what level of planning and what level of spontaneity were you allowing in the process?
I'm a very classical artist in the sense that I'm very unorganized, I'm very messy. I don't have a lot of structure in a lot of what I do. Um, so I think sometimes you can you can take what you learn out of necessity from other scenarios that you're forced in, and that's what I did. And you have to learn some basic structure, some ways of being able to operate. You have to market yourself. I think there's this myth that people who work in the holistic world should just remain poor and do everything for free, and they're not allowed to market themselves or talk themselves up. And I think that's so it's prejudice. I think it
Yeah.
comes from a very prejudiced place. Uh, it is a legitimate profession, and just like every other profession requires these things. If we are professionals, we're going to have to be able to reach out to others and let them know that this is what we offer, that we have gifts too, and that we have talents, and they're worth sharing with the world, and that we need to value them. So when I started to really, I was one of those people that didn't value my work, and it took me a lot of time and a lot of self-reflection to understand what it was that prevented me from valuing my work. And it's still a struggle, to be honest with you, Alexandra, because you still you still wonder and you still want to be able to make your work accessible. Even my last album I made entirely by donation, because I wanted it to be a kind of a way for people who have been suffering from COVID anxiety to be able to reconnect to natural sound and natural instruments, and to just give it a chance, just to try it, even if you paid $3, $5, $10, whatever. So I think it's a really fine balance to be able to say, look, I'm structured. I'm here in the real world. I have to pay attention to things like paying my bills and looking after my kids and doing all those things. But I also realize that you have to make some decisions where you at first you kind of do it out of service, community service.
Yeah. I mean, it is beautiful because we all start from these beautiful intentions, but then we also want to start to end up also taking care of ourselves. And especially as people who are highly empathic, we kind of always want this to be at a level of almost always of service, but that's not always possible because there is a level of pragmatism that we need to bring into the whole process. Um, and I'm very conscious that there is an 8 hour difference between
Yes,
London
it's
and
already
Bali.
it's
One
already
o'clock.
one o'clock, and it's storming
Exactly.
outside. Did you see the lightning out
Yes,
there?
exactly. So
So
I
maybe
want
we
to
should wrap
ask.
up.
Exactly. I have like three rapid fire questions,
Three questions.
and
Okay.
then we are basically done. So one thing is, what do you think is an absurd thing about you that you don't think many people know about?
I'm goofy. I'm very goofy. I'm nerdy. I'm goofy. You know, I like doing practical jokes on my kids and on my family members. Crank call my own family members and pretend that I'm somebody else. And,
Wow, that is cute.
I like to do these things just to keep my family on their toes. So yeah, I'm a goofball at heart, and I love I love things that are very kind of esoteric and eccentric as well.
Yeah, that goes with the art spirit.
Yeah.
And well, another thing is, what has become more important and what less important to you with age?
What's become more important with age? Um, wow, it's a really good question. I think time, realizing the value of time and not letting myself waste it. It just becomes more of an urgency as you get older. And especially when I saw, my parents losing my parents and so suddenly losing my mother. Just, we're not given a lot of time. And being able to say and do the things that you want
Yeah,
before the thunder drowns you
yeah,
out. Um, that's really important. Life is there for living to the fullest. And what's
and
become less important? Mm, I think you know taking taking uh, I think making decisions that kind of help your status, I guess, help you. Uh, I think in the past, I always wanted to network and get myself out and um, get more notoriety. And I kind of feel like, sometimes it's better just to rest and resource the body. And I've become much, much less social than I was in the past. And I'm, a Gemini,
yeah,
so that's hard.
I
But
know.
yeah, I just don't want to spend, again, it comes back to time, managing your time.
Yeah. And the last one, is there something that you want to ask yourself that, no one has ever asked you, but you have a dying wish to share with
Your
someone?
questions are so good. I love how these are the quick fire ones. They're like the toughest ones of all. What would I want to ask myself that nobody has ever asked me? Wow,
Yes.
that's a great question. What would I want to ask myself that nobody's ever asked me? Um, I think it would have to do with. I think it would have to do with parenting. I think it would have to do with like my style of parenting and whether I feel rewarded as a parent. I think
And
that's something. Yeah. Oh, you want me to answer it too?
yes.
I mean, the answer is yes. I do feel rewarded as a parent, but it's always a doubt. Like you never know what the balance, is as children grow and change. It's like every phase of their lives, you have to meet them.
Yeah.
And you have to lift them and be with them in that place. So far, so good, I would say. I feel satisfied up to this point, but we're talking about pre-teens. So check back with me in about 5 years, and I'll give you an update.
Yeah, actually, I have a plan to do these interviews in 10 years' time. Because also the reason is that I feel sometimes when we talk about success, we tend to romanticize it. And I feel when we capture a moment in time and we change so much, and this is also, I want to come back to your children. We always want to put them in a box almost, but we need to get to know them every day.
Yes.
And not even children sometimes, even adults, although we feel like, oh, we have such a rigid personality and we are already formed, we change so much. So
Yes.
I'm so glad that you have mentioned that, because it's also something I'm thinking about. Well, I would end up just with saying, basically, where can people find you? And how can they reach out to you? And how can they get to your albums and have your magical voice at least a little bit close to their ears?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for this interview, for your amazing questions, for your lovely smile, and for just the joy that you bring to what it is that you're doing. It's definitely something that comes across as a blissful experience for you as the interviewer.
Oh,
I can really feel that you love it. And that's so rare, it's so wonderful to see. And you can find me on soundhealingbali.com. And I'm also on Bandcamp. If you type in my name in the search, Shervin Boloorian, bandcamp.com. You can go to bandcamp.com and just type in my name. And I have a full discography, including my new album and my new EP. It was released not too long ago.
I have all of them, by the way.
Oh, yeah? Do you have the new one from December?
No, that's the only one.
You should check it out.
I will.
It's good. And what else? YouTube channel, Sound Healing Bali. Facebook, Sound Healing Bali. Shervin Boloorian artist. All of these things you can find.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, and thank you for sharing the magic of your voice with the world. It's really beautiful. You have just heard the story of Shervin Boloorian, Bali's award-winning natural music artist, trained sound therapist, and celebrated vocalist. He presents living sound and music as medicine for deep relaxation, peace, and connection to the unseen. He's also an accomplished recording artist, receiving 3 Global Peace Song Awards for his 3rd album, I Hear You, Mother Earth. Shervin presents various live music events, workshop trainings, and private sound healing sessions regularly in Bali. You can get more information about his work at www.soundhealingbali.com and listen to his work on Shervin Boloorian Bandcamp. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and please share, like, and subscribe so these stories can be connected.